The red dust of Epsilon 7 swirled around Jake Morrison's boots as he walked the perimeter of Mining Station Delta. The planet's twin suns beat down on his shoulders, turning the landscape into a sea of crimson rocks and deep shadows. He'd been foreman here for 3 years now, long enough to know every crack in the ground and every quirk of the drilling equipment that hummed day and night. In the distance, Jake was a tall man with weathered hands and eyes that had seen too many close calls in the mines. He'd served in the Colonial Marines before this job, back when humanity was still proving itself to the galaxy's older species. Now he oversaw 30 workers who drilled deep into this hostile world, pulling out rare minerals that Earth's fleet needed. It was hard work, dangerous work, but it was honest. The mining station sat in a valley between towering canyon walls. Prefab buildings clustered together like metal mushrooms, connected by covered walkways that protected against the dust storms. Beyond the fence line, Epsilon 7 stretched out in all its harsh beauty. It was the kind of place that killed careless people. But Jake wasn't careless. He stopped at the eastern fence and checked his datapad. The morning shift was running smooth. Drill Site 7 was producing good numbers, and the new excavation in the northern sector was almost ready to go online. Everything was exactly as it should be, which made Jake nervous. In his experience, things were never this quiet for long. He was right to be worried, though he didn't know it yet. 10 kilometers away, in a compound 3 times the size of the human mining station, High Matriarch Xena stood before a massive viewport and stared at the human operation with cold eyes. She was tall even for a Vakreen, with pale blue skin marked by the combat scars that denoted her rank. Her people had owned this planet for 2 centuries, and she commanded this entire sector with absolute authority. The Vakreen were warriors by nature and by choice. Their empire stretched across 40 systems built on strength and discipline. They believed in hierarchy, in the natural order that placed the strong above the weak. And in Xena's view, humans were weak. She'd watched them for 3 years, these soft pink creatures who came to her planet with their machines and their contracts. The Galactic Commerce Council said she had to honor the mining lease, had to let them dig in certain zones. But that didn't mean she had to respect them. Humans had no claws, no fangs, no natural armor. They were slow and fragile, surviving only through their technology and their strange tendency to work together. Xena found that last part particularly offensive. The Vakreen believed that true strength was individual. A warrior stood alone or not at all, but humans seemed to think their weakness in numbers somehow made them strong. It was pathetic. Her aide, a younger Vakreen named Drath, approached and bowed. Matriarch, the human foreman's team, has filed their daily report. Drill Site 7 continues to produce well. Of course it does, Xena said. They tunnel like insects, mindlessly following their programming. Drath hesitated. There is one issue. Their excavation in the northern sector has breached something. Our sensors indicate it may be one of the old burial sites from the Third Dynasty. Xena's eyes narrowed. The Third Dynasty had ruled this planet 800 years ago, before the Vakreen Empire had expanded this far. The tombs of that era were considered sacred, untouchable, and now these humans had blundered into one with their machines, treating Vakreen history like just another obstacle to dig through. Did they know what they were excavating? She asked. No, Matriarch. The site was not marked on any maps we provided to them. It appears to be an honest mistake. A mistake, Xena repeated. She turned from the viewport, her mind already working. How convenient. A chance to teach these humans about consequences. Drath looked uncertain. The treaty specifies that unintentional violations cannot be punished with termination of the lease. We could fine them, perhaps demand they cease operations in that sector. I'm not interested in fines, Xena said. She walked across her office to a reinforced door set into the far wall. I'm interested in making a point about the cost of disrespecting Vakreen territory. She placed her hand on the biometric scanner, and the door slid open. Beyond it was a chamber that few were allowed to enter. The floor was covered in thick padding, and the air smelled of raw meat and something wild. In the center of the room, lying on a raised platform, was Kodran. The Thornfang opened his eyes as his master entered. He was massive, 7 feet tall at the shoulder when he stood, with fur so black it seemed to absorb light. His eyes were amber, intelligent, and calculating. Scars marked his muzzle and flanks, trophies from the many hunts Xena had sent him on over the years. Thornfangs were the apex predators of the Vakreen homeworld, but Kodran was special. Xena had taken him from his mother's den when he was just weeks old, had raised him and trained him to be the perfect weapon. He understood commands that would confuse lesser beasts. He could track prey across any terrain, could wait in ambush for days if necessary, and had never failed to bring down a target. "My beautiful killer," Xena said, approaching him without fear. Kadrin's lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth the size of daggers. It wasn't quite a snarl, more an acknowledgement. "I have a task for you." She pulled up a holographic display and Jake Morrison's face appeared in the air between them. The image showed him standing near a drill site, gesturing at something beyond the camera's view. He looked competent, calm, utterly unaware that he'd just become prey. "This human has insulted us," Xena told Kadrin. "He and his workers have violated a sacred place. The treaty prevents me from simply killing him, but there are no rules against accidents in the wilderness." She expanded the hologram to show the terrain north of the mining station. Deep canyons and broken rock formations stretched for kilometers. The human foreman conducts regular survey missions. He goes alone into these canyons, checking potential drilling sites. His next mission is scheduled for 3 days from now. Xena looked at Kadrin and the Thornfang looked back. After years together, they understood each other perfectly. "I want you to hunt him. Track him into the deep canyons where there are no witnesses, no cameras. Make it look like the natural dangers of this world claimed him." "Can you do this?" Kadrin stood, his massive frame dwarfing even Xena's tall form. He moved closer to the hologram, studying Jake's face with the intensity of a creature that knew how to memorize prey. Then he turned back to Xena and made a low sound, half growl and half rumble. It was the sound he always made before a hunt. "Good," Xena said. She reached out and placed her hand on Kadrin's head between his ears. It was the closest thing to affection she ever showed. 3 days. Follow him into the canyons and end him. When it's done, return to me. The humans will learn that this planet has teeth, and those who disrespect the Vakreen do not leave alive." Kadrin's tail swept once across the floor, and his amber eyes gleamed with predatory focus. The hunt was set. The prey was marked. And Jake Morrison, standing at his fence line and watching the sunset turn the red rocks gold, had no idea that his death had just been ordered by cold eyes and given to a perfect killer who had never known mercy. The twin suns dipped below the canyon walls, and the temperature began to drop. Jake finished his perimeter check and headed back to his quarters, planning the survey mission he'd make in 3 days. He'd walk those canyons alone as he always did, confident in his skills and his knowledge of the land. He didn't know that this time, something would be walking with him, something that moved like shadows and hunted like death, something that had already chosen where he would die. Jake's boots crunched on the gravel as he made his way deeper into the northern canyons. It was early morning on his second day out, and the air still held a chill that made his breath visible. His pack weighed heavy on his shoulders, filled with geological sensors, camping gear, and 3 days of rations. The plasma sidearm on his hip was standard issue, meant more for signaling than fighting, but he kept it clean and charged anyway. Old habits from his Marine days died hard. The canyon walls rose around him like the ribs of some ancient giant. Red stone streaked with black mineral deposits climbed hundreds of feet into the pale sky. Down here in the shadows, the temperature stayed cool even when the twin suns reached their peak. Jake liked the quiet, the solitude. It gave him time to think without the constant hum of drilling equipment and chatter of the mining crews. He stopped at a promising outcrop and pulled out his scanner. The readings showed good mineral density about 40 feet down. This could be their next major site if the composition checked out. He marked the coordinates and moved on, unaware that eyes watched him from a ridge a kilometer behind. Kadrin had been tracking the human for a full day now. The Thornfang moved like liquid shadow across the rocks, his huge paws silent despite his size. He stayed downwind, using the canyon's natural air currents to mask his scent. The human was alone, vulnerable, exactly as Xena had predicted. It would be easy to take him now, to strike from behind and crush his spine in one bite. But something made Kadrin wait. Perhaps it was professional pride, the desire to study prey before the kill, or perhaps it was something else, something the Thornfang couldn't quite name. This human moved with awareness, checking his surroundings, choosing his campsites with tactical sense. He didn't stumble through the canyons like an ignorant creature. He moved like something that understood danger and respected it. Still, orders were orders. Kadrin would complete his hunt. But first he would observe. Jake made camp that night in a shallow cave, really just a deep overhang that gave him cover on 3 sides. He built a small fire and heated his ration pack, then sat with his back to the stone wall looking out at the darkening canyon. The stars were coming out, strange constellations that still felt foreign even after 3 years on this world. Something made him look at the rock face across the canyon. Nothing moved in the gathering darkness, but Jake's instincts prickled. He'd learned to trust those instincts in the service, and they'd kept him alive through situations that killed other men. He stood slowly, casually, and walked to the edge of his camp as if stretching his legs. There, in the dust near a boulder 200 yards away, prints, huge prints, each one the size of a dinner plate with 4 distinct claw marks at the front. Jake's heart rate picked up, but he kept his breathing steady. Something big was out there, something that had been following him. He walked back to his fire, moving naturally, not wanting to alert whatever it was that he'd noticed. But once in his cave, he pulled out his plasma sidearm and checked the charge. Full power. He set it to wide dispersal rather than focused beam. If something rushed him, he wanted flash and noise, not just a single shot. He also pulled out 3 sonic charges, small devices meant for breaking up rock formations. They wouldn't hurt anything seriously, but the high-frequency burst would disorient most creatures. Jake placed them at strategic points around his camp, hidden but easy to trigger. Then he settled in for a long night, sleeping in short intervals, always listening. Twice he heard movement on the rocks above his position. Once he saw a shadow that seemed too large and too purposeful to be natural. But nothing attacked, and when dawn came, he was still alive. The second day of the hunt had begun. Jake broke camp quickly and started moving. But now he changed his pattern. Instead of stopping frequently to scan rock formations, he kept moving, choosing routes that gave him good sight lines and defensive positions. He was being hunted, he was sure of it now, and every instinct told him to get back to the station. But Jake Morrison hadn't survived the colonial Marines by running from every threat. Whatever was out there, it was smart enough to track him and patient enough to wait for the perfect moment. If he ran, it would just chase him down in the open canyon floor. Better to control the situation, to pick his ground and make the hunter work for its kill. He found what he wanted an hour before noon. A rock formation that created a natural bottleneck, with a clear area behind it where he could see anything approaching. He set up his scanner as if conducting normal geological work, but his attention was on the surroundings, watching for movement. Cadron saw the trap and approved, despite himself. This human was clever. He'd noticed the hunt, and rather than fleeing in panic, he'd chosen to face it. The Thornfang had hunted hundreds of creatures across a dozen worlds, and most ran when they knew death was coming. But not this one. The respect Cadron felt confused him. He was a weapon trained to kill without question. Yet something about this human's calm competence, his refusal to be easy prey, stirred something in the Thornfang's chest. Something that felt almost like admiration. But Xena had given her command, and Cadron had never disobeyed. He began his final approach, moving from shadow to shadow, using the rocks for cover. He would strike from the right side, where the human's defensive position had a slight blind spot. It would be quick. Honorable in its way. Jake saw the flicker of movement 3 seconds before the attack came. His hand was already on his sidearm when 7 feet of black-furred death exploded from behind a boulder, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. Jake fired. The plasma discharge lit up the canyon with brilliant white light, and the sonic boom of superheated air sent echoes crashing off the walls. But he'd set the weapon to wide dispersal, and while the flash and noise were tremendous, the actual damage was minimal. It was enough to make Cadron flinch mid-leap, enough to throw off his attack by crucial inches. Instead of landing on Jake and crushing him, the Thornfang hit the ground beside him. Jake rolled, came up, and triggered 2 of his sonic charges. The high-frequency burst filled the air, a sound so painful it made his own ears ring even through his protective earpieces. Cadron staggered, shaking his massive head, and Jake got his first clear look at what was hunting him. The creature was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Black fur rippled over muscles like coiled steel. Amber eyes blazed with intelligence and fury. Teeth like daggers showed as the beast snarled, and those claws, each one as long as Jake's fingers, dug furrows in the hard rock. Thornfang, Jake breathed. He'd heard of them, but never seen one. They were the Vakrine's most prized war beasts, and if one was here, someone had sent it deliberately. This wasn't random. This was an execution. Kadrin recovered from the sonic assault and circled, looking for an opening. But the human kept turning with him, keeping his weapon raised, maintaining distance. And the human was talking, his voice steady despite the situation. "You're magnificent," Jake said. "Fastest thing I've ever seen. But you're not going to kill me today, are you? Because you could have finished this already and you haven't. You're curious about me." Kadrin's ears flicked forward. Could the human understand him somehow? No, that was impossible. Yet the tone of voice was strange. Not fearful, not aggressive. Something else. Jake kept talking, kept moving, his marine training taking over. "Someone sent you to kill me. I can see the intelligence in your eyes. You're not just a dumb animal. You're a soldier, like I used to be, following orders. But here's the thing about soldiers, we recognize each other." He lowered his weapon slightly, just a fraction, not dropping his guard, but showing he wasn't just blind prey. "You want to know what makes humans dangerous? It's not our technology. It's not our numbers. It's that we know when to fight and when to make friends. And right now I'm thinking maybe you and I don't have to be enemies." Kadrin should have attacked. Every instinct should have driven him to complete his mission. But the human's words, or perhaps the tone behind them, made him pause. This prey showed no fear, only respect. And respect was something Kadrin had rarely known. Xena trained through discipline and punishment. Obedience through pain. But this human looked at him and saw something worth respecting. The Thornfang sat back on his haunches, a gesture of consideration. Not submission, but thought. Jake saw the shift and felt a wild hope. "That's right. We can think about this. You're too smart to be just a weapon. What's your name? Does your master even give you a name, or are you just a tool to them?" Kadrin's lips pulled back. The human presumed too much. He was Kadrin, pride of Xena's kennel, the most successful hunter in her service. He had a name. He had honor. He had... The thought stopped. What did he have? A master who saw him as a weapon, who kept him in a chamber and sent him to kill, who had never once asked what he wanted, what he thought, what he felt. Jake took a calculated risk. He holstered his weapon and held out his hand, palm up, non-threatening. "I'm Jake, and I think you and I might have more in common than your master realizes. We're both out here following orders, both soldiers doing what we're told. But maybe it's time to think about what we actually want." Kadrin could tear that hand off with one snap of his jaws, could kill this human in a heartbeat, but instead, slowly, the Thornfang leaned forward and sniffed the extended hand. The human scent was fear and sweat, and Deep Jake kept his hand on Kadrin's head for a long moment, feeling the Thornfang's breath, steady and deep. When the massive creature didn't pull away or bite, Jake felt something like triumph mixed with relief. He'd just survived what should have been certain death and somehow turned his killer into something else. He wasn't sure what yet, but it wasn't an enemy anymore. Slowly, carefully, Jake stepped back and looked at the gash across his left shoulder. During the initial attack, Kadrin's claws had caught him. Not deep enough to be fatal, but deep enough to bleed freely. His shirt was soaked red on that side, and the pain was starting to make itself known now that the adrenaline was fading. "Well," Jake said, pulling out his medical kit with his good hand, "that's going to need attention. You got me pretty good there." Kadrin watched as the human cleaned and sealed the wound with practiced efficiency. The Thornfang's ears were forward, head tilted slightly in what might have been curiosity or confusion. In all his hunts, no prey had ever survived his first strike and then just calmly treated their injuries as if nothing had happened. This human was strange. Jake finished with his shoulder and looked at Kadrin again. Now that he wasn't fighting for his life, he could really study the creature. Scars marked the Thornfang's muzzle and flanks, some old and faded, others more recent. These weren't the random marks of a wild animal. These were the precise wounds of combat training, controlled violence meant to teach and toughen. "She's rough with you, isn't she?" Jake said quietly. "Whoever owns you. Training through pain. I've seen that before in the service. Some commanders think fear and discipline are the only way to create soldiers, but those units always break under real pressure. The best soldiers, the ones who actually survive, they're the ones who fight for each other, not because they're scared of their commander." Kadrin made a low rumble in his chest. It wasn't quite a growl, more a sound of acknowledgement. Could this human really understand? Could he see what Xena had done, what she continued to do? The Thornfang had never questioned it before. He was a weapon, and weapons didn't have opinions. But now, with this human's calm voice and strange respect, Kadrin found himself thinking thoughts he'd never allowed before. Jake sat down, his back against a rock, and pulled out a ration pack. He opened it, and the smell of synthetic meat and vegetables filled the air. Kadrin's nose twitched. The Thornfang was hungry. The hunt had been long, and Xena never fed him well before a mission. She said hunger made him sharper. Jake noticed the interest and held out half of his meal. Here, you're probably starving if she sent you out here without supplies. That's another thing about bad commanders. They don't take care of their soldiers. Kadrin hesitated. Xena fed him only after successful hunts and then only raw meat from creatures he'd killed himself. This was different. This was sharing, something he'd only seen among his own kind when they still ran in packs before the Vakreen captured and separated them. He moved forward and took the food from Jake's hand, careful not to let his teeth touch the human skin. The taste was strange, but not unpleasant. More importantly, it was freely given, not earned through violence or fear. Kadrin sat down a few feet from Jake and ate slowly, watching the human do the same. So here's what I'm thinking, Jake said between bites. You were sent to kill me, but you're having second thoughts. I get that. Orders are orders, and you've probably been trained your whole life to obey without question. But the thing about intelligence, real intelligence like you've got, is that it comes with choice. You can choose to complete your mission, or you can choose something different. Kadrin's amber eyes fixed on Jake's face. The human wasn't ordering him, wasn't commanding or threatening. He was just talking, presenting options as if the Thornfang's opinion mattered, as if Kadrin was an equal. I'm not going back to the station for 2 more days, Jake continued. I've got survey work to complete, and honestly, I need the time for this shoulder to heal before anyone sees it. So here's my offer. You can stay with me, see how humans actually treat their companions. Then when we get back, you can decide what you want to do. Return to your master or stay with me. Your choice. The word echoed in Kadrin's mind. Choice. He'd never had a choice before. Xena commanded and he obeyed. That was the extent of his existence. But this human was offering him something no Vakreen ever had, the freedom to decide his own path. Kadrin stood and moved closer to Jake, then lay down beside him, his massive body radiating warmth in the cool canyon air. It was an answer without words. He would stay, at least for now. He would see what this human meant by companionship. Jake smiled and reached out to scratch behind Kadrin's ears. The Thornfang's eyes closed slightly, and that rumble came again, deeper this time. Almost like the purring Jake had heard about from Earth's big cats, but stronger, more resonant. There you go, Jake said softly. Nobody's ever done that before, have they? Just touched you without it being about training or punishment. You're not just a weapon, friend. You're a living being, and you deserve better than you've been getting. They spent the rest of that day together in the canyon. Jake went about his survey work, and Kadrin followed, watching with interest as the human used his devices to scan rock formations and mark promising sites. Jake talked constantly, explaining what he was doing, asking Kadrin's opinion on which paths to take. The Thornfang couldn't answer in words, but his body language was clear enough. When Kadrin's ears went back and he growled softly, Jake learned to avoid that direction. When the creature moved confidently toward something, Jake followed and often found exactly what he was looking for. That night, Jake made camp in a wider section of canyon, with good sight lines all around. He built a fire and heated another ration pack, splitting it with Kadrin without being asked. They ate together, and afterward Jake pulled out a small data pad and showed the Thornfang pictures of Earth. This is where my species comes from, Jake explained. That's an ocean, biggest one on our planet. And these, he pulled up images of wolves. These are the distant ancestors of creatures we call dogs. Thousands of years ago they were predators like you, hunting in packs. But humans and wolves made a deal. We'd hunt together, protect each other, share food and shelter. And over time, those wolves became our most loyal companions. They're part of our families now. We love them and they love us. Not because of orders or fear, but because we chose each other. Kadrin stared at the images. These Earth wolves looked nothing like him, smaller and less powerful. But the way they interacted with the humans in the pictures, that was what caught his attention. The wolves were happy. The humans were happy. It was partnership, not ownership. I'm thinking maybe the galaxy is bigger than any of us realize, Jake said. Maybe bonds like that, partnerships between different species. Maybe that's something that happens everywhere when both sides are willing to try. What do you think? Codron made that deep rumble again and moved closer until his head rested on Jake's leg. It was warm by the fire and the human's voice was soothing. For the first time in his life, the Thornfang felt something like peace. Not the exhausted satisfaction after a successful hunt, but actual peace, safety without violence, companionship without fear. Jake dozed off eventually, his hand resting on Codron's head. The Thornfang stayed awake, keeping watch. Not because he was ordered to, but because he wanted to. This human had shown him kindness when he should have shown fear. Had offered friendship when he should have offered his throat. Codron didn't fully understand what was happening to him, but he knew one thing. He would protect this human. Not for Xena, not because of orders, but because Jake Morrison had given him something precious, something he'd never known he was missing. The third day brought trouble. They were making their way through a narrow section of canyon when Codron suddenly stopped. His ears flat against his head, lips pulled back in a true snarl. Jake immediately went alert, pulling his sidearm, scanning the rocks. Then he heard it, a series of sharp chittering calls echoing off the canyon walls. "What is that?" Jake asked, and Codron's rumble was answer enough. Danger. Serious danger. They came over the rocks in a pack, 8 of them, moving with the jerky quickness of insects but covered in scaled hide. Rift claws, native predators of Epsilon 7. Each one was the size of a large dog with 6 legs that ended in hooked claws and mouths full of needle teeth. Individually, they weren't that dangerous. In a pack, they were deadly. Jake fired once, the plasma bolt catching the lead rift claw and sending it tumbling. But the others kept coming, spreading out, trying to flank them. This was what they did, what they'd evolved to do. Pack hunting, overwhelming prey with numbers and speed. But they'd never faced a human and a Thornfang fighting together. Jake kept firing, controlled bursts that forced the rift claws to dodge and weave. He wasn't trying to kill them all, just keep them from surrounding his position. Meanwhile, Codron moved like black lightning, intercepting rift claws that tried to get past Jake's covering fire. The Thornfang's claws and teeth found targets with brutal efficiency. One rift claw went down with its spine severed. Another died with its skull crushed in Codron's jaws. But there were too many, and they were too fast. One got through, leap. The message reached High Matriarch Xena, less than an hour after Jake walked through the mining station gates. Her aide Drath delivered the news personally, his voice carefully neutral but his posture suggesting he expected an explosion. "The human Foreman has returned," Drath said. "He is unharmed, and Codron is with him." Xena stood so fast her chair toppled backward. "What do you mean with him? Bring me visual confirmation. Now." Drath activated the holographic display and security footage from the mining station's perimeter appeared. There, walking calmly through the gates, was Jake Morrison with his pack and equipment. And beside him, not on a leash or chain but simply walking alongside, was Codron. The Thornfang's posture showed no signs of distress or captivity. He was there by choice. Xena watched the footage 3 times, her blue skin darkening to purple with rage. Impossible. Codron has never failed a hunt. Never. This human must have used some technology, some device to control him. "Our sensors detect no control mechanisms," Drath said carefully. "No neural suppressors, no pain inducers, nothing. The Thornfang appears to be acting of his own will." "Thornfangs don't act on their own will," Xena snapped. "They are weapons, tools. They obey their masters or they are destroyed. This human has stolen my property. Matriarch, technically the human did not steal anything." Codron followed him back voluntarily. "The treaty specifies that—" "I don't care about the treaty right now." Xena's voice could have cut steel. "Assemble a full security detail. We're going to the human mining station and I'm taking back what's mine." Within 2 hours, 3 Vakreen military transports touched down outside Mining Station Delta. Xena emerged from the lead transport with 20 armed guards, all wearing full combat armor. The humans at the perimeter fence took one look at the force and immediately called for Maya Collins. Maya arrived at the gate within minutes, flanked by her own security people. She was a short woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many corporate negotiations to be easily intimidated. But even she felt a flutter of concern at the size of the Vakreen force. "High Matriarch," Maya said formally. "What brings you to our station with such a large escort?" "You know exactly why I'm here," Xena said. "Your Foreman has taken my Thornfang. I'm here to retrieve him and to discuss consequences for theft of Vakrine property. With respect, Matriarch, nobody took anything. Your Thornfang followed Jake back here voluntarily. Thornfangs don't volunteer, Zena's voice was cold. They follow commands. Your human must have used some device or chemical to influence Caudron's behavior. That constitutes theft under galactic law. Maya held her ground. We've scanned Jake and found nothing. No devices, no chemicals. If your Thornfang chose to stay with him, that's the animal's choice. Animals don't choose. They obey or they don't. If Caudron has malfunctioned, he needs to be returned to me for reprogramming. Reprogramming? Maya's voice sharpened. Matriarch, Thornfangs are classified as sentient species under Galactic Commerce Council regulations. They have neural complexity scores that qualify them for basic rights. You can't just reprogram them like machines. Zena's eyes narrowed dangerously. How I manage my war beast is not your concern. Now let me through, or I will consider this an act of hostility. Maya knew when she was backed into a corner. The Vakrine had military superiority here, and starting a shooting war over this would get people killed. She nodded slowly. I'll take you to Jake. But Matriarch, I'm also filing an immediate report with the GCC about this situation. We're doing this by the book. File whatever you want, Zena said. Just take me to my Thornfang. They found Jake in the station's main courtyard, surrounded by a crowd of curious miners. Caudron lay beside him in the shade of a building, his massive head resting on his paws. Several of the miners' children were nearby, watching the Thornfang with wide eyes. One little girl, no more than 5 years old, was close enough to touch Caudron's tail. Jake was explaining something about Thornfangs to the gathered crowd when he saw Zena approaching. His expression went carefully neutral. Caudron's head came up immediately, and the Thornfang's lips pulled back in a silent snarl. Caudron, Zena's voice cracked across the courtyard like a whip. To me now, the Thornfang didn't move. His amber eyes fixed on Zena, but he stayed exactly where he was, his body between Jake and the approaching Vakrine guards. Zena stopped, shock replacing rage for just a moment. In all the years she'd owned Caudron, he had never, not once, refused a direct command. Caudron, I gave you an order. Come here immediately. Still, the Thornfang didn't move. That rumble Jake had come to know started deep in Caudron's chest, a warning sound that made several of the Vakrine guards step back despite themselves. What have you done to him? Zena demanded, turning on Jake. What drugs did you use? What device? Jake stood slowly, making no sudden moves. I didn't do anything to him except treat him with respect. Something I'm guessing you never tried. Respect? Zena's laugh was harsh. Respect is earned through strength and discipline. Caudron understands his place. He is a weapon, nothing more. Is that what he is? Jake asked quietly. Because from where I'm standing, he looks like a living being who's tired of being treated like property. Zena moved forward, her hand reaching for the neural prod at her belt. I will use force if necessary to retrieve my property. Caudron surged to his feet, and suddenly his size was impossible to ignore. 7 feet of pure predator, muscles coiled, teeth bared. The warning rumble became a full-throated roar that echoed off the prefab buildings and made every human and Vakrine in the courtyard freeze. I wouldn't, Jake said, his hand moving to rest on Caudron's shoulder. The Thornfang's roar cut off, but he didn't stand down. He's not going back with you. Not unless he chooses to. He doesn't get to choose. Zena was shouting now, her composure completely shattered. I raised him from birth. I trained him. I own him. Everything he is, I made him. You trained a weapon, Jake said. I met a person. There's a difference. Zena's hand closed around the neural prod and she activated it. The device hummed with energy designed to cause pain to Thornfang nervous systems. She'd used it hundreds of times on Caudron during training. He would recognize the sound, remember the pain, and submit as he'd always done. Instead, Caudron's posture shifted. His ears went flat, his body lowered into a combat stance, and the look in his eyes was one Jake had never seen before. Pure rage. This wasn't just defiance. This was years of pain and humiliation finally finding a target. Matriarch. Drath's voice was urgent. Please. The Thornfang is prepared to attack. If you advance with that weapon, there will be violence. Zena stood frozen, the neural prod still humming in her hand. For the first time, she was seeing something she'd never imagined. Fear. Not in Caudron's eyes, but reflected back at her from the eyes of her own guards. They were afraid of the Thornfang, and more than that, they were questioning whether they should intervene. Some of them were looking at Kadrin with something that might have been sympathy. Maya stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. High Matriarch Xena, under Galactic Commerce Council Statute 447, Section 12, any creature with a neural complexity score above 8.5 has the right to choose their associations. Thornfang's score 9.2. Kadrin has chosen to stay with Jake Morrison. If you attempt to take him by force, you will be in violation of GCC law, and I will have grounds to request military intervention from Earth's Colonial Defense Force. This is absurd, Xena said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. The treaty you keep mentioning actually supports what I'm saying, Maya continued. I've already transmitted the relevant sections to your aide. You can review them yourself. But the bottom line is this: you cannot take Kadrin by force. Not legally. If you try, you risk starting a conflict between the Vakrine Empire and the Human Coalition. Is your pride worth that? Xena looked from Maya to Jake to Kadrin. The Thornfang was still in his combat stance, still ready to fight. But as she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw something she'd missed before. The scars she'd given him during training. The way he flinched slightly when she raised her voice. The years of conditioning and pain she'd inflicted in the name of creating the perfect weapon. And she saw something else. When Kadrin looked at Jake, the tension in his body eased. The human's hand on his shoulder calmed him in a way Xena's commands never had. There was trust there, freely given, not beaten into submission. This isn't over, Xena said finally, deactivating the neural prod. I will be filing formal complaints with the GCC. I will be seeking compensation for the loss of valuable property. And you, she pointed at Jake, you have made an enemy today. The Vakrine do not forget insults. I'm not trying to insult you, Jake said. I'm just trying to give Kadrin the choice you never did. If that makes me your enemy, then I'll deal with that. But I won't apologize for treating a living being with dignity. Xena turned and walked away, her guards falling in behind her. But several of them looked back at Kadrin as they left, and their expressions were complicated. Some showed anger, yes, but others showed something that might have been understanding or even envy. They were soldiers who followed orders without question, just as Kadrin had. But now they'd seen one of their number choose a different path, and that choice was a seed planted in their minds. After the Vakrine departed, the crowd of miners erupted. The harassment started 3 days after the confrontation. Supply shipments to mining station Delta were delayed without explanation. Vakrine patrol craft began flying low over the human compound at all hours, disrupting sleep and work. Equipment orders were tied up in bureaucratic reviews that hadn't existed before. Xena was making her displeasure known in every legal way she could manage. But something unexpected was happening too. Kadrin's presence was changing how the mining operation functioned. The Thornfang's superior senses detected gas pocket formations that human scanners missed, preventing 2 potential tunnel collapses in the first week. His ability to navigate the canyon terrain led Jake's survey teams to mineral deposits they would have overlooked. Production numbers actually increased despite the Vakrine interference. More than that, though, Kadrin was changing the people. Miners who'd been wary of the massive predator at first found themselves talking to him during breaks. And while the Thornfang couldn't speak, his body language communicated well enough. Children treated him like a huge, gentle pet, and Kadrin tolerated their attention with surprising patience. The little girl who'd first approached him, Lisa Chen, appointed herself his official friend and brought him treats she saved from her meals. Jake watched it all with growing wonder. This wasn't just about one human and one Thornfang anymore. It was about proving that different species could work together as equals, could build something better than either could alone. Then, 3 weeks after Kadrin's defection, something changed. A Vakrine transport requested permission to land, but it wasn't a military vessel. It was a civilian craft, and the pilot identified himself as Kyle Bennett, a human mining technician who'd been working at a different operation on Epsilon 7's southern continent. Maya met the transport personally, and what she saw made her call Jake immediately. Jake, you need to get to the landing pad, now, and bring Kadrin. When Jake arrived with the Thornfang at his side, he found Kyle standing beside 3 creatures that made his heart skip. Baby Thornfangs, each one about the size of a large dog with oversized paws and ears that hadn't quite grown into their heads yet. They huddled together nervously, making small whimpering sounds. Found them in the deep canyons near our site, Kyle explained. Their pack was killed by rift claws, looks like. These three were the only survivors. I couldn't just leave them out there to die. Codrin moved forward slowly, and the juvenile's ears perked up. They recognized what he was, even if they'd never seen an adult Thornfang under human care. The largest of the three, a male with a white patch on his chest, approached cautiously. Codrin lowered his head and made a soft rumbling sound, and the juvenile responded in kind. "What are you going to do with them?" Jake asked Kyle. "I was hoping you'd know. I've kept them fed and safe, but I don't know anything about raising Thornfangs. You're the only human who's ever managed to bond with one. I figured if anyone could help them, it'd be you." Jake looked at the three juveniles, then at Codrin, then at the growing crowd of miners who'd come to see what was happening. An idea was forming, one that was either brilliant or insane. "Maya, I need to call a meeting, and we need to invite the Vakreen." 2 hours later, Jake stood in the station's conference room with Maya, Kyle, and a holographic projection of Xena. The High Matriarch had refused to come in person, but she'd agreed to hear what the humans had to say. Codrin lay in the corner of the room, the three juveniles curled up against his warm bulk. "High Matriarch," Jake began. "I know we haven't been on good terms since Codrin chose to stay with me, but I'm hoping we can move past that, because I have a proposal that could benefit both our peoples." Xena's holographic image looked skeptical. "I'm listening, but I promise nothing. These three juveniles need care and training. In Vakreen tradition, you would likely consider them worthless because their pack was destroyed. But I see potential. I see three young Thornfangs who could grow up understanding both our species, who could be proof that there's a better way to work with your war beasts. They are not war beasts when they are untrained cubs," Xena said. "They are liabilities, weak. They would be culled or abandoned in our culture." "I know," Jake said. "But what if we tried something different? What if humans and Vakreen worked together to raise and train these juveniles? We could study Thornfang behavior and psychology, learn what methods produce the strongest, most capable adults. Not through pain and domination, but through respect and partnership." Xena was quiet for a long moment. "You want me to allow humans to train Vakreen war beasts? You see how this sounds like espionage, yes?" "I see how it could look that way," Jake acknowledged. "But it could also be the start of real cooperation between our species. Think about it. You've built your entire society around strength and hierarchy. But what if you're limiting your own potential? Codrin is stronger with me than he ever was under your control, not weaker. He fights harder, thinks clearer, because he's fighting for something he chose, not something he fears." "This is human sentimentality," Xena said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Emotions make soldiers weak, do they?" Maya interjected. "Because from where I'm sitting, fear makes soldiers unpredictable. Loyalty built on respect makes them unstoppable. Your own guards hesitated when you tried to take Codrin by force. They were questioning their orders, questioning you. That's what fear-based loyalty gets you, Matriarch. Hesitation at critical moments." Xena's image flickered as she adjusted her position. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A joint program," Jake said. "Humans and Vakreen working together to study Thornfang development. We raise these three juveniles using different methods, document everything, and compare the results. If your way produces better warriors, fine, you were right all along. But if our way works, if respect and partnership create stronger bonds, then maybe it's time to reconsider some assumptions. And what would I get from this besides the pleasure of watching humans attempt to train creatures they don't understand?" Jake smiled. "Knowledge. Real scientific data about Thornfang psychology and development. Whatever we learn, you get full access to. Plus, if this works, if we can prove that cooperation produces better results than domination, imagine what that could mean for the Vakreen Empire. You could revolutionize your entire military structure." Xena was silent for a long time. Long enough that Jake started to think she'd simply disconnected. Then she spoke, and her voice was different, less harsh. "I will agree to this proposal with conditions. First, I appoint the Vakreen personnel who will work on this project. Second, all data is shared equally between our peoples. Third, if at any point I determine that the human methods are harming the juveniles, the program ends immediately. Agreed?" "Agreed," Jake said, relief flooding through him. "When can we start?" "Tomorrow," Xena said. "I will send 3 of my trainers, ones who still remember the old ways before our methods became quite so harsh. But understand this, Jake Morrison, I am not doing this because I believe you are right. I am doing this because you have forced me to question things I thought were certain, and I find that I want answers." The hologram disconnected, and Maya let out a breath she'd been holding. "I cannot believe that worked." "Neither can I," Jake admitted. He looked at Kadrin and the juveniles. The adult Thornfang was grooming the young ones, his tongue rasping over their fur in a gesture that was pure parental instinct. "But I think we just changed the course of human-Vakreen relations." The program began the next day. 3 Vakreen trainers arrived at Mining Station Delta, all older soldiers with scars that spoke of long service. They were stiff and formal at first, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of working alongside humans. But when they saw how Kodrin interacted with Jake, how the massive Thornfang responded to voice commands given with respect rather than force, something in their expressions shifted. The oldest trainer, a Vakreen named Tors, approached Jake on the 3rd day. "I trained Kadrin when he was young," Tors said. "Before High Matriarch Zena took over his development personally. He was gentler then, more curious. I always wondered what he could have become if we had not beaten that curiosity out of him." "You disagreed with the training methods?" Jake asked carefully. "Many of us did," Tors admitted. "But we are soldiers. We follow orders. The High Matriarch believed that harshness created strength, and who were we to question? But now, seeing Kadrin like this, seeing what you have done with simple respect and patience, I think perhaps we have been wrong for a very long time." Over the following weeks, the joint program produced remarkable results. The 3 juveniles, who Jake's team had named Nova, Flint, and Echo, thrived under the combined care of humans and Vakreen. They learned commands in both languages, responded to both species with trust, and showed none of the aggression that typically marked young Thornfangs raised in traditional Vakreen programs. More importantly, word spread. Other Vakreen began visiting the mining station, officially to observe the program but really to see Kodrin and the juveniles. They watched as Lisa Chen, now 6 years old, played hide-and-seek with Nova, the Saint.